They say some clocks don't tell time, they trap it. When the hands strike midnight, time doesn't move forward, it opens. And once it opens, it doesn't close until it takes someone with it. Thomas didn't believe in such things. Not then. Not when the letter arrived. Not when he first set foot in the manor. But by the time the clock struck 12 and the shadows began whispering, it was already too late. Thomas Reed had never heard of Elias Whitmore. Not once. Not even in the scattered, blurred pieces of his childhood memories. And yet, the letter that showed up at his apartment window spoke of blood and inheritance. A name, his, inked in cursive on the front. No return address. No postal stamp. Just coordinates and a key. He should have thrown it away. Burned it. Ignored it. But there was something in the way his fingers trembled when he held it. Something ancient. Something waiting. The road to the manor was the kind that didn't exist on modern maps. GPS stopped working halfway. The sun vanished behind clouds that felt like they'd been stitched there since time forgot how to move. Trees lined the path like silent sentinels. And when he reached the gate, a rusted thing with curled iron like claws, the wind stopped. Just like that. As if the land beyond it didn't breathe the same air as the rest of the world. Whitmore Manor rose like a bruise against the horizon. Black stone, crooked towers, windows that stared back like empty eyes. The key slid into the door without resistance. It opened with a long, aching groan, like something waking up after too long in the dark. Inside, the cold was immediate. Not the kind that nipped at your skin. No, this cold crawled deeper, into the bones, the blood, the mind. Dust floated through the still air like ash from a fire long extinguished. Portraits lined the halls. Pale men, hollow-eyed women, their painted stares too lifelike. As if someone had painted over real faces, trapped them in the canvas. One of the portraits looked too much like him. He turned away. The manor stretched in directions that didn't make sense. Rooms led to other rooms without walls between them. A staircase twisted up, then ended at a ceiling. Behind a red velvet curtain, Thomas found a door with no handle. Just a narrow iron keyhole, like an eye watching back. He tried the key. It didn't fit. That night, he made a fire in one of the less decayed rooms, near what seemed like a library. Among the rotted books, only one lay clean. New. Placed there for him. Time and its traps, an inquiry into clocks of occult origin. Half of it was unreadable. But one line stood alone, underlined in red. Midnight is not when the day ends. It's when what was buried tries to breathe. And just as he closed the book, the sound came. Tick. Not loud. Not rhythmic. Just one, deliberate tick. From the hallway, Thomas stood slowly, heart tapping against his ribs. He stepped into the corridor. Nothing there. But the sound came again. Louder. Tick. Tick. And then he saw it. A grandfather clock. 7 feet tall. Carved from black oak. Symbols twisting up its spine. Eyes. Spirals. Teeth. The pendulum swung, but the hands were stuck at 11:59. It hadn't been there before. He knew it hadn't. He would have noticed something that ancient. That wrong. He reached out. The moment his fingers touched the wood, the clock responded. Dong. It struck once. Deep. Shuddering. Dong. Again. 12 times it echoed through the empty house. As the final chime rang out, Thomas turned. Something moved behind him. A whisper. Soft. Cold. Female. You're not the first to come back. He spun around. Empty. And when he looked again, the clock was gone. Thomas didn't sleep that night. Not really. His body may have rested, but his mind remained wired, buzzing like a frayed power line. He kept replaying the chime in his head, the way each strike of the clock had settled into his bones like cold lead. He had touched the clock, heard it, felt it, and then it had vanished. Just like that, as if it had never existed. But the air still carried the scent of aged wood and brass oil. Faint, yet undeniable. The next morning, the house seemed different. Not in shape, but in presence. As if it were aware now, watching him with its unseen eyes. Every creaking floorboard beneath his feet sounded too deliberate. Every corner too quiet. The portraits didn't just watch, they studied. Judged. Waited. He began exploring further, looking for clues. Anything that could explain the clock, the whisper, the legacy he'd inherited without asking. It was in the West Wing that he found the study. A room sealed behind a warped wooden door, locked with a rusted iron latch. Oddly, the key fit this one. Turned clean. As if it had been waiting for his hand all along. Inside was darkness, untouched by time. The curtains were thick, choking the sunlight. Dust blanketed every surface like an untouched tomb. Shelves groaned under the weight of books so old their spines had fossilized. And at the center of the room stood a desk, and on it, another clock. Not a tall one this time, but a smaller, ornate piece, carved with the same twisted symbols. The second Thomas stepped into the room, the clock's hands twitched. Just once. And stopped. He approached carefully, each footstep sending echoes across the wooden floor. The desk drawers were all locked except one. Inside, he found a letter, yellowed with age and sealed with the same red wax as the one he'd received weeks ago. This one was addressed not to him, but to someone named Emmeline. He unfolded it gently. The ticking begins again. I thought I silenced it. I thought sealing the chamber would stop the whispers. But it starts anew. Every night, at the stroke of 12. Emmeline, if you find this, know that the clock cannot be moved. It's not bound to the house. It's bound to the blood. Thomas's fingers trembled. The letter was signed. Elias Whitmore. He sat back, heart thudding. So Elias had known about the clock, known it couldn't be stopped. And what did it mean, bound to the blood? He didn't want to admit it, but something inside him was starting to remember. Not clearly, just feelings, faces, screams. A shadow crawling across a floor lit by candlelight. Something buried. Something wrong. That night, he didn't try to sleep. He waited. He lit candles in the study, closed the door, sat in the chair facing the strange little clock. And at 11:59, the room changed. The air grew thicker, as if the walls inhaled. The flames of the candles bent inward, pulled by something unseen. And the clock ticked. Once, then again, and then, without warning, the world went still. The shadows along the shelves trembled like they were alive. And from behind the bookshelf came the sound of scratching. Slow, dragged, like nails across stone. Thomas stood. The scratching stopped. He approached the bookshelf. ran his hand along the edges. Nothing seemed out of place, until he knocked on the wood and heard it. Hollow. Just one panel, different from the rest. He pulled on it, and it moved. A hidden passage. Narrow. Cold. Descending. He hesitated only for a moment before stepping in, the candle shaking in his grip. The stairs creaked under his weight, groaning like old bones. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small stone room. A circle drawn in chalk covered the floor. Symbols, matching those on the clock, surrounded a cracked mirror hung on the far wall. The reflection in the mirror was wrong. Not just reversed, but older, weathered, like it had been left alone for centuries. And then, the reflection blinked. Thomas stumbled back, and from somewhere in the darkness behind the mirror, a voice whispered again. "You're remembering now, aren't you?" Thomas backed away from the mirror, candlelight flickering in wild, frightened waves across the room. The air had thickened, as though the stones themselves exhaled around him. The whisper still rang in his ears, delicate, but deliberate, impersonal. It wasn't a ghostly sound lost in the wind. It had known him, known his name without saying it, known his thoughts, his fear. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had gone dry, muscles locked. That mirror, it wasn't glass. Not really. It was a surface stretched tight over something watching from the other side. Something waiting. As he stared, the symbols around the cracked mirror began to pulse. Just slightly. Not with light, but with presence, as if they were drawing something in, or keeping something out. Thomas turned and left without looking back. He didn't run. Something told him not to. As if turning his back to the room too quickly would invite it to follow. The climb back to the study felt longer. When he finally stepped back into the candlelit room, the clock on the desk had stopped ticking. Its hands were frozen again, this time at 12:07. He slammed the hidden panel shut and dragged a chair in front of it. His hand shook as he tried to relight the candle's dying flame, but the matchbook was damp with sweat. Eventually, he gave up. He sat in the dark and listened to the house breathe. In the hours that followed, he scoured the study again, desperate for more of Elias's letters, for anything that would explain what he had just seen. Buried beneath loose floorboards near the fireplace, he found a small chest. Inside, more letters and a worn journal bound in dark green leather. The first page chilled him. The clock cannot be destroyed. I tried. It returns. Always at midnight. I do not sleep anymore. I do not dream. I only wait. As you will. If you are reading this, I failed. Thomas flipped through the pages. The entries became increasingly erratic. Scribbled words. Pages torn out. One entry repeated the same phrase over and over. It's not a clock. It's a gate. The next night, Thomas lit every candle he could find and placed them in a circle around the study. He sat in the center, the journal in his lap, the strange clock watching him from the desk. He stared at it, willing it to tick, waiting for the whisper, for the hands to twitch, for anything that would prove he wasn't going mad. And at 11:59, the same shift happened again. The weight of the house changed. The air pressed in, the flame dimmed, and the clock ticked. Once, twice, then slowly, the minute hand moved. 12 o'clock, midnight. From outside the study, somewhere deeper in the manor, came the sound of wood creaking, heavy footsteps, deliberate, someone or something walking the halls. Thomas stood, grabbing the fire poker from the hearth. He edged toward the study door, pressed his ear to it. Silence. Then, another creak, closer this time, and a sound that turned his stomach cold. Tick, tick, tick. The clock was still ticking, even as the hands stayed still. The sound wasn't coming from the study anymore. It was coming from beneath the floor. A whisper slid between the cracks in the wood, curling around his ankle like smoke. Find the heart. Thomas threw the door open. The hallway was empty, but the sound continued. Tick, tick, tick. Leading him toward the east wing, toward the locked velvet curtain door he had found on his first day. The one with no handle. Only this time, the door was open. Just a sliver. Enough for the ticking to escape. Enough to invite him in. He stepped forward, pulse pounding. The velvet curtain brushed his arm like a cold hand. The air inside smelled of dust and old stone, and something sweet, like rotting flowers. The room beyond was round, bare stone walls. A tall mirror at the far end, just like the one behind the bookshelf. But this mirror was intact, and in front of it, standing perfectly still, was the grandfather clock. It had returned. Same blackwood, same carvings. But now, its hands spun slowly backwards. And Thomas wasn't alone. In the mirror, standing behind him, was a woman in white. Face blurred, eyes bleeding shadow, and she was smiling. Thomas couldn't move, not because something held him back, but because every instinct inside him had frozen. His reflection stood there, lit by candlelight, motionless, but in the mirror, just behind him, the woman was breathing. Her chest rose and fell gently, like she'd been waiting. For minutes. For years. For him. He turned quickly. Nothing. The space behind him was empty. The grandfather clock continued ticking backward, its rhythm cold and surgical. Tick, tick, tick. Each tick seemed to peel something away from the room. The warmth, the air, the silence. He stepped forward, eyes locked on the mirror again. And this time, when he looked, she was closer. Right behind him now. Still only in the reflection. Her smile wider. Her eyes bottomless. Her hands, pale and still, now pressed against the glass from the inside. Thomas stumbled back, breath catching in his throat. The floor under him creaked as though something slithered beneath it. For a moment, he thought he could hear it. Not footsteps, but something dragging. Something that didn't walk on feet. The mirror began to fog from the inside, as if her breath, or whatever passed for it, was reaching for him. Words appeared in the condensation, scrawled from the other side by an unseen finger. I remember you. Thomas blinked. The fog cleared. The woman was gone. The ticking stopped. And with it, everything else. The air went dead still. The mirror cracked down the center with a brittle snap. The grandfather clock let out one last tick. Not mechanical, but organic. Like a rib cracking under pressure. He ran. The door slammed shut behind him without a sound. The hallways twisted. He could swear the path to the study was shorter before, but now, it stretched like a maze. The portraits along the walls had changed. Their eyes weren't just watching. They were wide now, afraid. Some of their mouths were open in silent screams. He reached the library and collapsed onto the floor beside the desk. The green journal lay open, its pages fluttering in a wind that wasn't there. The next entry had appeared without him turning a single page. She's awake now. The time loops until the heart is broken. The soul never leaves. The clock keeps her memory alive, and it's feeding on mine. Soon, I will forget everything but her name. Syra. Syra. He whispered it aloud. The moment he did, the clock in the study ticked once more. And then, from the darkness above, a voice echoed down through the walls, soft and distant. You promised, Thomas. His blood turned to ice. The voice hadn't come from inside the house. It had come from inside his head. Memories struck like lightning, not full scenes, but fragments. A candlelit room. Blood. Chalk symbols drawn on the floor. A woman bound in silk. Screams buried under chanting. His own hands, younger, holding a key. It wasn't possible. He had never been here before. He had never seen this woman. Had he? He reached for the journal again, flipping to the final page. This one was written in a frantic, hurried hand. Ink smeared. Lines overlapping. If the air remembers, the circle can't close. You must forget. You must forget. You must forget. Or she returns again. And again. And again. But he didn't want to forget. He wanted to know the truth. He had inherited this house. This curse. But what if he had caused it? What if the reason the clock only ticked at midnight was because that's when he had broken time? He went back to the passage behind the bookshelf. The mirror in the ritual room was cracked now, too. The symbols around it glowed faintly blue. The air tasted like salt and iron. In the center of the chalk circle lay a locket. He picked it up. Inside, a portrait. The same woman from the mirror, but younger, smiling, alive. On the back, a name carved with a pin, Syra Whitmore. And below it, written in a trembling, barely legible hand. Forgive me. I didn't know what they were doing. A wave of nausea hit him. The name Whitmore. She was family, not a ghost, not a stranger. She was blood, and the clock wasn't just bound to her. It was bound to him. Thomas sat on the cold stone floor, the locket clenched in his fist, the candles around him flickering like they were gasping for air. The name, Syra Whitmore, burned into his mind now. Not just because it was etched into metal, but because it was inside him, echoing from somewhere deep, somewhere old. The images came faster now, clearer. He saw her, Syra, dressed in white, standing in a circle drawn in chalk. Dozens of candles around her. People in robes, faces shadowed, chanting words that twisted the air itself. His own face was among them. Younger, confused, terrified. Elias Whitmore stood behind him, hand on his shoulder, whispering, "This is the price. The blood must remember." Thomas dropped the locket. It hit the floor with a hollow clink that echoed louder than it should have. The moment it did, the candles extinguished all at once, drowning the room in suffocating dark. Then the whisper came. Not cruel, not angry, but sad. "You left me." He turned. Nothing. But he could feel her. In the walls. In the floor. In the silence itself. He lit a single match, the tiny flame barely strong enough to fight the void pressing in from all sides. The moment the light touched the mirror again, it was no longer cracked. It was clear, smooth, alive, and in it, Cyrus stood again. Only this time, she wasn't behind him. She was beside him. Thomas spun, heart thundering. Still nothing. He looked back at the mirror. Cyrus stared at him with eyes full of heartbreak. Not malice, not rage, just pain so deep it had rotted the air around it. She reached out and touched the inside of the glass, and from it bled time. He watched as the reflection aged. The walls behind her faded, then rebuilt. The candles reversed, melting upward, then flickering backward into fresh wax. The chalk circle brightened, then vanished. She was showing him everything. The ritual, the moment her fate was sealed. A sacrifice, not for power, but for protection. A blood offering meant to seal something far older beneath the house. She hadn't volunteered. She had been chosen. By Elias. By the Whitmores. By bloodlines obsessed with containing something that could not be controlled. Thomas wasn't innocent. He had been born into it. The clock was the chain that kept the truth buried. And the ticking at midnight, it wasn't a warning. It was a reminder of what they did, of what he had forgotten. Cyrus' image faded slowly, replaced by the clock once more. But this time, instead of counting backward, the hands spun forward, faster, faster, until they blurred. And as they spun, the room around him trembled. The wall behind the mirror cracked. From inside came a noise like grinding teeth, stone tearing against stone. He stepped back as the glass shattered, the shards hovering in the air like frozen snowflakes before falling soundlessly to the ground. Behind the mirror was a door, wooden, ancient, covered in carvings that pulsed faintly with light. And in the center, a keyhole. Thomas looked down at the locket in his hand. The tiny clasp at the top, shaped exactly like a key. He didn't think. He knew. The locket had never been a keepsake. It had always been the key. He stepped forward and pressed it into the door. It fit. The moment it turned, the ground shook. Dust rained from above. The sound of clocks ticking in unison echoed through the manor, through the walls, through the very foundation. Time waking up. The door creaked open, and beyond it was nothing. Not darkness, not a room, but a void, a space between seconds, a rift where time had been torn and left to rot. Floating in it, hundreds of clocks, suspended mid-tick. All of them fractured, all of them watching. Cyrus stood among them, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as something real. She turned to him. Her voice reached him like wind through leaves. You opened it, Thomas. Now you have to choose. He stared into the void, the ticking around him now deafening, layered with whispers, names, memories that weren't his but felt like they belonged. Close the gate, she said, or let it swallow everything. And suddenly he understood. The clock wasn't keeping time. It was keeping her. And now, she was offering to end it, or to begin it again. Thomas stood at the edge of the doorway, staring into the emptiness that pulsed with ticking hearts and fractured seconds. The clocks floated silently now, waiting, suspended like stars in a night sky that didn't belong to any world he knew. They weren't just keeping time. They were holding it hostage, each one a prison cell for a forgotten moment, a fractured life, a broken promise. Cyrus stepped forward, her feet never touching the floor. She hovered above the void like she belonged there, as if she had become part of it. Her dress flowed behind her like mist, her eyes no longer hollow, but full of something far more dangerous, memory. "You were just a boy," she said softly. "They made you watch, told you it was salvation. That time needed a guardian." "I don't remember that," Thomas whispered, voice trembling. "You will," she replied, "because the clock remembers everything, even when you don't." The truth hit him like cold water. He hadn't just stumbled into this. He had been chosen, groomed, long before the letter arrived. Elias had planned it. Elias had built the ritual, sealed the rooms, written the letters that would only ever be found after his own death. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a cycle, one meant to restart the moment Thomas set foot in the manor. And now, the cycle was breaking, or evolving. The clocks behind Syra began ticking again, soft at first, then louder, building like a storm. The void trembled under the weight of it all, and the door behind Thomas groaned, as if the house itself feared what was coming. "You can seal the door again," she said. "Use the locket. Lock it shut. Let me remain. Let the clocks keep ticking without you." "And if I don't?" he asked. "Then the past bleeds into the present," she said, "and the house will never stop remembering." Thomas turned, looking back into the hallway behind him. It seemed farther away now, like miles, not feet. The world he had known, the life he'd lived, it felt like a dream half forgotten. Only the cold, ticking truth remained. His fingers clutched the locket, now warm in his hand. It pulsed like a heartbeat, synchronized with the ticking around him. He could feel the house watching, listening, waiting. Elias's voice whispered from the past. "If he forgets, the clock resets. But if he remembers, the house dies with him." Thomas stepped forward, not back toward the house, but deeper into the void. The clocks began to shudder. Some cracked. Others stopped completely. Syra looked at him, not with surprise, but with sorrow. "You would stay?" she asked. "If I stay," he said, "you're free." A pause. "Then who becomes the clock's prisoner?" The moment stretched. The clocks began spinning wildly, hands screaming across their faces like knives. Time was unraveling. The manor shook above them, dust falling from between moments. "I do," he said, and the void accepted him. The clock silenced. The door behind him slammed shut. And Whitmore Manor exhaled. Morning came. The fog lifted from the valley. The wind stirred through broken trees. Birds returned to the long dead branches. And in the heart of the manor, the study stood silent. The grandfather clock, once tall and looming, had vanished. All that remained on the desk was a locket, closed, still warm. In the mirror above the fireplace, only one reflection remained. Not of Thomas, not of Syra, but of the manor itself, quiet, patient, still watching. Somewhere, buried behind the walls, a soft ticking began again. Just once. And then it stopped. The manor stood still. No more whispers echoed through its halls. No footsteps tapped across rotting wood. No clocks ticked behind hidden walls. Just silence. Thick, unmoving, as if time itself had taken a breath and was deciding whether or not to exhale. But deep beneath the floors, behind walls sealed by rituals and memory, the locket still pulsed, once every hour, like a slow, steady heartbeat. A reminder. Outside, days passed, then weeks. The locals in the nearby village noticed the change. For the first time in 100 years, the trees on the manor hill didn't lean away from the house. The fog that once curled like claws around the estate began to lift. People whispered that maybe whatever haunted that place had finally gone. But none dared to go up and see. Not yet. And then, one afternoon, a stranger arrived. Not Thomas. Not Elias. A woman. Young. Curious. Carrying an envelope just like Thomas once had. No return address. Only coordinates. And a name. Emmeline Whitmore. She stepped through the broken gate with the same hesitation. The same wide eyes. The same sense that something was watching her. Inside the manor, dust had settled again. The curtains hung limp and gray. The fireplace was cold. But in the center of the study, on the old wooden desk, the locket lay waiting. She picked it up without thinking. It opened on its own. No photograph inside. No name. Just a tiny gear. Ticking. She smiled, just slightly, and whispered, "He did it." But as she turned to leave, the mirror on the wall cracked. A single fracture, running straight down the center. From somewhere behind the glass, a whisper, "Not yet." Beneath the manor, the void stirred. Clocks long thought broken began to twitch. Just barely. Like something waking from a long, dreamless sleep. Time, it seemed, couldn't be buried forever. But as she turned to leave, the mirror on the wall cracked. A single fracture, running straight down the center. From somewhere behind the glass, a whisper. Not yet. Beneath the manor, the void stirred. Clocks long thought broken began to twitch. Just barely. Like something waking from a long, dreamless sleep. Time, it seemed, couldn't be buried forever. Because memory is not a flame. It is a fuse. And somewhere, beneath that ancient house, the ticking had started again. Night fell over Whitmore Manor like a closing eye. The wind was still. The trees no longer creaked. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of waiting. Emmeline sat in the study, the locket resting on her palm, its gear gently ticking. She didn't know why she had come. Not really. The letter had said she was family, that she'd inherited something sacred, something forgotten. And though she had never met Elias, never heard the name Thomas in her life, something in her bones had ached the moment she crossed the threshold. The manor recognized her, welcomed her, as if it had been waiting. She rose and wandered the halls. The portraits no longer wept. Their faces had changed, smoothed. One frame stood empty, its canvas torn as if whatever once lived inside had escaped. She followed the ticking sound, not from the locket now, but from everywhere. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Slow and deliberate, not mechanical. Alive. It led her back to the mirror. The same one Thomas had stood before, now fully mended. She stepped closer. Her reflection stared back, unchanged. But just as she turned away, she caught something in the corner of her eye. She looked again. There was a second figure behind her, motionless, tall, familiar. Thomas. But he wasn't himself anymore. His eyes were not his own. They swirled with brass and shadow, ticking in rhythm with the clocks buried deep in the manor's bones. "You opened the door," he said, voice soft, distant. "You weren't supposed to open the door." "The locket called me," she whispered. "I thought you were gone." "I was. I am," he said, eyes distant. "But I remember now. All of it. And the clock does too." The mirror rippled. A chime rang out. Midnight. 12 strikes. Each one deeper than the last. With every chime, Emmeline felt her heartbeat slow. The room dimmed. Shadows bled from the corners. And behind the glass, Thomas reached out, not to hurt, not to pull her in, but to give her something. "Finish it," he said, "before time forgets us again." And then he was gone. The mirror emptied, and at her feet, the locket burst open, its gear now still. Inside it, a small slip of paper, folded once. Emmeline opened it. A single line, written in a shaky hand. "When the clock ticks at midnight, do not listen." The ticking began again. She didn't move, didn't breathe, because she already had. And far below, in the belly of the house where the clocks waited in the dark, one began to count forward.